Zhao Shenghao, good morning, and thank you very much for coming. And I wanted to begin by saying thank you for coming to discuss not only the York Subway Extension, Toronto-York Spadina Subway Extension that we're opening this Friday, but also to maybe make mention of some work that we're doing on the budget as it goes forward for approval later in the winter. The subway that's going to be opened this year, and I'm not happy to say this, but it's a fact, I'm happy that it's happening. It's the first extension to a subway that we've opened in 15 years. And I can tell you right now that I'm very determined it won't be the last subway extension that happens during my time here, and it's going to be not another 15 years before we open another subway, because that's too long between different projects of this kind. And I think it is a good example, this particular subway extension opening starting this weekend, of the good work that is being done in the city. I think people can and should have confidence that things are getting done for them at City Hall. Things are happening here. I think it begins with people having confidence in the mayor and in the mayor's office. And that's why when I was elected, my top priority was reestablishing a sense of honesty and integrity and trust in the office of the mayor. I've never lost sight of that objective that really is key to getting everything else done during the time that I've been here over the last 3 years. And I believe that people do have confidence in the mayor's office and in the mayor again. I'd ask people to take their minds back just 3 short years ago. The city was completely stuck. It was mired in chaos. Things were not functioning properly. The city wasn't going anywhere. Things weren't getting done. And now finally we're getting Toronto moving, which is one of the things that is most on the minds of people who live here. We're cracking down on cars and trucks that block lanes of traffic during rush hour. We're bringing in new traffic wardens, people who are not police officers, which carries a great cost, police officers do, but people who are trained and are equipped to direct traffic and to make sure that we can make a real difference in traffic congestion at key intersections around the city. We're using technology. We're partnering, for example, with Waze so that we can give more information to people who are trying to get around the city. For the first time, we've introduced corridors where there will be smart traffic signal technology. And it's not something that we're just talking about anymore. I was actually up on Yonge Street, just at the edge of North York, last week to actually launch this equipment. And I think that is a very important step forward to make our roads work better. We've made riding transit free for kids 12 and under. This is helping thousands upon thousands of families, not only to save money, but to help them get around so they can take their kids with them to go shopping or take their kids to the library without having to spend a lot of extra money. And it also, at the same time, is, I hope, creating a generation of kids, young people, who are transit users and who think about using transit first before anything else. We have literally restored dozens of bus routes that were cut by the Ford administration. They were cut. Those bus routes were just abandoned, and people were left without bus service in those neighborhoods. And we've made investments beyond that to improve bus service and streetcar service and to make it better. We've opened the subways 1 hour earlier on Sunday morning. It's only a small step, but it improves life for people who are trying to get around. And many people work on Sundays or they go to church on Sundays, and they were finding it difficult when the subway didn't open until 9 o'clock. Now it opens at 8 o'clock, and I hope we can keep working to get it open earlier on Sundays. We've given transit vehicles priority on King Street. This is the so-called pilot project, the King Street pilot project. It cuts commute times for 65,000 people who use that streetcar every day. We're moving forward on building more transit, most important of all. The real answer to addressing congestion, which is a big problem affecting a lot of people and affecting the economy and business in the City of Toronto, is a lack of convenient, available, affordable transit. And we now have approved a significant network transit plan for the City of Toronto, which includes a number of transit lines so that our transit map will look more like the ones I see when I visited Japan and China and Europe and New York City. The mayors of some of those cities have either presented me with a map when I've been in their cities, including in my visit to China not too long ago. Also, the ambassador from Japan was in here not long ago. I was in overseas, and you see their transit maps, and you just cry at the fact that we have two sort of transit lines, and that's all that ours consists of, together with streetcars and buses, but that we should have done more to build a major transit over time. I should also tell you that the subway that is opening this weekend, which does represent a source of great joy and accomplishment, and I give credit where it is due to Premier Dalton McGuinty, who was the Premier at the time, and to Mayor David Miller, and also to Prime Minister Paul Martin. But when I came to office as Mayor, the project was in huge trouble. It was going way over time to the point where it wouldn't have even opened until the spring of 2019, and there were cost estimates ranging all the way up to $1 billion more to be spent to get it finished. And Mr. Byford, the CEO of the TTC, raised it with me before I was even sworn in as mayor, and I asked him to develop a game plan to get it finished, which he did, and we then pushed that forward through the City Council and implemented that plan so that we are, this weekend, going to be opening that subway to make sure that people could use it far earlier than 2019. And I can't tell you what the consequences might have been if we hadn't acted on his plan at that time, early on in my own mandate. We are going to move forward with this subway open to build SmartTrack. It is going to be hugely beneficial to people right across the city, using, as it does, largely existing GO train tracks to move people around the city. GO Transit has been a very effective vehicle for moving people from the 905 regions into Toronto and back out again at the end of the workday. But now we're going to be able to use it much more effectively to move people inside the City of Toronto by building and financing stations inside the City of Toronto, but the tracks are already there. And we're going to do this and the other projects, including the relief line and including getting the Scarborough Subway Extension done, because we have successfully established good partnerships with the other governments. I have worked very hard on this, and I've worked hard leading the charge to make sure that we had effective partnerships with the federal and provincial governments, and the result of that has been quite literally billions of dollars of new investment in transit, and yes, we're making progress on housing as well from those other governments to help build up the City of Toronto. My approach is always the same. I work firmly, but also at the same time respectively and cooperatively with these other governments. And again, you don't have to take your mind back very far to a time when there were very fractious, very difficult relationships that existed between Toronto and the other governments. And this meant that we had obstacles placed in front of us in terms of the support we need to have from those other governments to get transit and housing built. We've also worked hard at City Hall on the budget. And that means constant efforts have been made to find efficiencies and to identify savings. We have managed at one and the same time to keep taxes low. And I would emphasize something here, because I'm criticized for it often enough. I want to treat it as a significant accomplishment, which I believe it is. This will be the budget that's coming forward now and be dealt with this winter, will be the fourth budget that I have brought forward during my time in office that keeps tax increases at or below the rate of inflation, while at the same time making significant investments in housing, in transit, in childcare. We have shown that by achieving efficiencies and by running the city in a proper business-like manner, that it is possible to keep tax increases at or below the rate of inflation and still invest in improved services for the people of the City of Toronto. And I will meet that commitment again in the 2018 budget to keep property tax increases for people living across the city, many of whom are seniors on fixed incomes, many of whom are young people on fixed budgets. We will keep that tax increase to the rate of inflation or below. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll conclude on this note. We have come so far in so many areas, whether it is housing, where we're finally meeting our targets, whether it is transit, where we have a number of projects across the city underway and we've restored the cuts made by the previous administration, whether it is a host of other areas where we've made progress. We can't afford to turn back now. We've got to keep moving the city forward, keep moving the city forward on a positive way, not go back to cutting bus routes and to cutting services for people and doing nothing about traffic. Too much is at stake. And that is why I will, as I've indicated a number of times before, but I've not had this particular group in front of me, I'll be seeking re-election later on next year to say to people that we've got to continue the work we're doing, continue to have respect for the Mayor's office, continue to have sound partnerships between this and the other governments, continue to have a relationship between the Mayor and the City Council that is productive and stable, as opposed to what we've seen in past times. So I'll stop on that note, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have about anything that is of interest to you.
Yeah, Mayor Tory, next year is a provincial election, also a municipal fundings from the provincial government regarding for Smart Track, Downtown Relief Line, and the Scarborough subways?
I would say this. I think the funding for those projects can only get better as a result of the election, and here's why I say that. We are having the party leaders in. Mr. Brown has recently been here. Ms. Horvath has been here. Premier Wynne is coming here in the not-too-distant future. And the objective is to say to them, how much are you prepared to do to finance transit in Toronto? And while they've all said they're prepared to do something, I don't think we've seen the last word yet, especially from the current government. And so I'm optimistic that my job is to get as much as I can from them to help build transit in the biggest city in the province, the economic engine of Ontario. And so I'll continue to work, and I believe the end result, when that election is over, regardless of who wins, is that we will be better off as a city in terms of how much transit we'll be able to build with their help than we are today.
And one follow-up is, last time you mentioned that there is an underway going for Scarborough Subway Extension. There's workers doing exams for Title I and stuff. How about Downtown Relief Line? What's their, can you give an update on their schedule?
I'm pleased to say that the Government of Ontario, through Metrolinx, has allocated $150 million to the design and planning work for the relief line. This is the first money that's been allocated to substantial work to be done on that project. It still has many years to go. But the good news is work is underway on the relief line. It is something we're going to keep moving forward every step of the way. And that is the best indication I think people can have that this project is proceeding, that the Province of Ontario, through Metrolinx, have committed $150 million to that project. And the next stage will be to get their long-term funding commitment to actually build the project, which is something I have been working on. I've had a number of news conferences to talk about that. I've raised it with the Premier a number of times. And those are the kinds of things that I'll be pressing for before the election, to get a commitment that regardless of who wins, there will be the funding to build the relief line beyond the work that is being done now on planning and design. Well, I'm very happy to say that the federal government, through its Phase 2 allocation of money, has dedicated several $billion to the priority projects identified by the City of Toronto, one of which is the relief line. And so we will have federal funding for that. I can assure you we will have city funding for that. So in the case of the province, the amount that is thought best is 40% of the cost. And right now that looks like several $1 billion because it's a very expensive project because it's big. And so I will only say to you that we would look to ideally have 40% from the federal government, 40% from the provincial government, and 20% from the city. But we're going to have to see going forward how my discussions go with Premier Wynne and with the Government of Ontario that is in office, whether it's hers or a different one after the election.
What do Torontonians can expect from this opening of this new line in terms of the neighborhood, like the travel time, parking space, even, and will that help?
I think the opening of the subway, that is the first subway that goes out of the borders of Toronto into the region of York, is going to be a great thing for people on both sides of that border. It's going to be fantastic for students and staff and others at York University. It's the first time they're going to have transportation other than hundreds of buses that go in and out of York University right now. I think it's going to lead to new investment along its line as subways encourage it to happen. I think you're going to find there are offices and residences that are going to be built along the subway from Downsview right up to Vaughan. That is going to be good for the economy, good for places for people to live and work. So I think it's going to be of huge benefit, as I believe will be the Bloor-Danforth-Scarborough Subway Extension. I believe that subway extension into Scarborough of the existing Bloor-Danforth subway line to the Scarborough Civic Centre will create a magnet for jobs, for office buildings, for residences in the centre of Scarborough. And I think that is finally going to let Scarborough have the same thing that other parts of the city already have, which is the ability to have jobs and residences located near each other so people can walk to work. It will be a magnet for investment, for people to build office buildings that just haven't been built in Scarborough. And that's one of the reasons I believe so strongly in this project as being a good one in the long-term best interests of the whole city, including Scarborough. Well, the Scarborough line, of course, it very much depends on our ability to keep pushing it forward, and it's one of the reasons why you've heard me express concern about the fact that there are people in this City Hall building who seem determined to slow this down or stop at every opportunity they get, notwithstanding the fact that the Scarborough-Bloor-Danforth subway extension has been approved at least 8 or 9, if not 10 times here. It is approved by all 3 levels of government. It is approved by all political parties provincially and federally. And so to me, that is a good indication of a project you should be proceeding with, and that's exactly what I intend to do. And the finishing date is seen in about the mid-2020s, so it's about, you know, sort of a little less than 10 years from now if we just keep moving it forward. If people bog it down, then it just delays transit, which is something that I think we've done for decades, and I think it's been to the detriment of the city. I can only say that these big transit projects take a lot of time. If you look at all that has to be done, there is the tunneling work, which takes years. Then there's all the work to outfit the tunnels with the wiring and the tracks and the safety features and so on. And then there's all the testing and commissioning. And so just as this subway project took 7 or 8 years, so too is the Eglinton project going to take an equivalent period of time. And so as much as people think with the tunneling done that it should open any day, what they're doing now is building the stations and doing the outfitting of the tunnels, and it is not for several years yet that project will be in operation. But I can only tell you that it is being built as fast as it can be built, and there's no slowing down for any reason at all. It's full steam ahead, and it'll be great when it's done, and I'll look forward to celebrating the opening of that project too, which I hope will happen during my second term in office.
Mayor Tory, now that the feds agreed that gave 70% of the tax revenue from recreational marijuana to the province, what do you think that the city should get from the tax revenue regarding to get cover for the policing costs and all the other costs from the city, because eventually that's the city who are going to enforce legalizing marijuana?
I think the City of Toronto should be getting a very substantial check. And if the money that comes from the collection of that excise tax on marijuana isn't enough to cover our costs, then they should give us more. And that is because I believe very strongly that while I support the law that is being passed, because I think it's a sensible thing to do at this stage in our history, that I don't believe city taxpayers should be put to any additional expense by these laws that are passed by other governments. And we will have extra expense with policing, with the zoning authorities, with public health. And so the amount of money I would like to see from the province is us adding up all the additional costs that we have to bear because of the change to the law, and to be sent that amount of money. Whether that equates to what's collected in the excise tax or is more or less, I think we should be getting that amount of money, that the extra cost that we're forced to bear as a result of this change in the law. And I've told that to the Premier, and I will continue to put forward that position.
So now the province get up to 70, more than 70, up to 75% of the tax revenue. So maybe the city should get half of the...
I'm not going to get into stating a fraction, because I think it could go against what I've just said, which is I think that the province should take this very significant amount of money that it's going to get from the federal excise tax, and they should be dividing it up on the basis of saying that especially the biggest city in the country, where you will have the biggest cost of policing, we'll probably have the most stores here selling marijuana, we'll have the greatest zoning challenges, the greatest public health challenges, and we should be compensated for any additional expenses, reasonably calculated, that we're forced to bear as a result of the change in the law. So I'm very hopeful with all this money they're going to get, that they will give us what we need to fully offset the expenses that we're being asked to bear as a city and as city taxpayers because of the change in the law.
And the city of Markham and the town of Richmond recently received a letter from provincial government that they want, the province wants to set a shop in their cities or towns, and they have expressed great concerns about how that would affect the zoning or close in the commercial plazas. Have you, City of Toronto, get the letter from province and want to set a locations in Toronto? And if yes, where they plan to set the shop in Toronto?
The discussions as to the locations of the marijuana shops are underway, because we have said, yes, we accept the regime that is put forward, the distribution method chosen by the province. We think it's sensible. There's going to be a relatively modest additional number of stores, as you know, and we've said that we will work with them to determine where those should go. But our main concerns, of course, in where those are located have to do with, you call it zoning, I mentioned the word too. Really what it has to do with is making sure that there are suitable locations, not too close to schools, not too close to family neighborhoods, not in the middle of retail areas that may find it to be something that isn't good for kids and families. So we'll have that discussion with them, and I'm sure together with them we'll be able to decide together on careful places to put these stores that treat them for what they are, which is a legal entity, but at the same time make sure that it respects neighborhoods, respects families, respects the safety of kids, respects the location of schools and businesses, and I'm sure we'll sort that out.
Can you give us a little bit detail on this weekend, how the opening, what we can expect to see?
Yes, in summary, the way it will work is as follows. Friday will be the official opening, which will be attended by senior representatives of all three levels of government, and it will be more of one of those kinds of ceremonial things. The public will not yet be using the subway, but there will be an official opening. Saturday, there's some people who put their names in over time to have a contest, as it were, to be among the people that get to ride the subway first before it's open to the public, and that will take place on Saturday together with some open houses at some of the stations. And then on Sunday at 8 o'clock in the morning, 1 hour earlier than it would have been before my term in office, on Sunday morning at 8 o'clock, the subway will begin normal operations, and the public will be able to ride the subway in the usual manner. And so that'll be the first real day of public riding on the subway, but there will be 2 days of celebrations before that. Anything else? Any other issues? Any other questions?
Any cakes or music?
I'm sorry, what's that again?
Any cakes or music?
Oh, I'm sure there'll be lots of that kind of thing. They don't get me involved in that detail, but it's meant to be a celebration put on in a reasonable manner because it is significant. And it's significant. It would be significant in any event to open a new subway extension, but it's particularly significant in this case because of the length of time that passed between the last subway extension and this one. And that's the kind of thing we cannot continue in this city. We've got to think bigger. We've got to think about the fact the city is growing rapidly and that more people want to try and get around other than with a car. Car is very expensive. Car is polluting. Car sits and causes congestion. And so people are not going to switch to transit, though, if there isn't transit. So we've got to get these transit projects moved forward, and that is why I say it's so important that we continue to do that work next year, but also that in the 4 years after that, we have a positive, can-do, get things done kind of attitude in the mayor's office, working in partnership with the city council and with the other governments.
Just a quick update. Can you update us as for the city hall security? Because there are some people concerned that they want to keep this because safe for city halls.
The bottom line here is that we want the City Hall in 2017 to be safe, especially for the people who work here and for the people who visit here. And there are thousands of people who come in and out of this building every day. But what you have to do is achieve a balance between that safety for the people who work here and making sure that the building remains accessible. And so what we decided as a City Council last week, and I think it was the right decision, it was upon my recommendation, is that we should fix some of the security aspects around the outside of the Nathan Phillips Square so that vehicles can't be where they're not supposed to be, and that we can take some less intrusive measures in some of the committee rooms, but that on the front doors we would get some public input. So I'll say through you, we want to hear from the public as to what they think is an appropriate level of security in one of the major public buildings of this whole region and this whole country. Toronto City Hall, everybody knows what it looks like, everybody knows where it is. And we want it to be safe, but at the same time we want it to be open. And so we're inviting the public through you to tell us what they think is appropriate. And we're going to seek that input out and then take that into account in making final decisions. But for now, I think the only change people will really notice, and they probably won't even notice this very much, is that we will be making the square, Nathan Phillips Square, safer for people. It's safe already, but I think we'll be making it safer through some of the steps that we'll take.
Even in next year, that there's more security details around city halls and maybe metal detectors at entrance. Would that affect the people who are using the library or who are using the public washroom for homeless or the daycare students that they normally travel through the city hall?
These are all the important things that we're having to think about in making these decisions, and it's why it's best not to make them quickly. There are children who come into a child care center here, and you want them to be safe on the one hand, but you don't want them and their parents to have to go through a huge, rigorous arrangement to get in the building. There's a library branch downstairs. We want people to come to that library and use it. That's part of our great library system, the biggest free library system in the world. but we don't want them. We want them to be safe, but we don't want them to be subject to a lot of barriers getting in their way. And so that's why we're taking the time to do this right, to consider this carefully, to make sure first and foremost that people are safe who work and visit this building, but to make sure that it remains open and accessible to people, everybody, at the same time. Last question. Are we all done? Well, thank you very much again. I hope if you find this useful, I'm very happy to do it again, and I'll let my staff, Kevin and Don, know about that, but I'm more than happy to visit with you, and also to do it in places that might be more convenient. I know that oftentimes many of you sort of have offices and so on out to the east in the city, and I'm out there often, as you know, probably 3 or 4 times a week. So I'll leave that to you to give some feedback to Don and to Kevin as to how I can make sure that I'm accessible to you anytime. And of course, you're always welcome to. I see the media almost every day, and you're always welcome to join that. But sometimes there's particular questions that you're interested in, and I want to make sure I make myself available to you as well. Thank you very much.